Hey people, welcome back. I'm Indypride from Milk and Cookies Total War, and today we'll be covering another legendary Lord character I expect to see in Total War Warhammer 2. This video will address one specific Lord, their background lore, and their possible implementation in the second game of the trilogy. Now for the Dark Elves, the Drukhai of Nagaroth, we already know who their first legendary Lord will be. Malekith the Witch King. He was confirmed in the Warhammer 2 announcement trailer and on the Steam page for the game. We don't know yet who the second starting legendary lord will be, but as I've stated in other videos, it seems very likely it will be Morathi, Malekith's mother, and the Hag sorceress of Grond. After that, things get a little bit more muddled, but I think I have a pretty good idea of who we'll be seeing leading sub-factions in Nagaroth sometime after launch. Crone Hellebron, the Blood Queen of Harganeth, would be perfect for a legendary lord pack across from Alarielle the Everqueen in a Queen and the Crone DLC. Hellebron would come with a few Cainite units, Alarielle might come with the Sisters of Avalorn, and both factions would of course get a bunch of Regiments of Renown, as we've had with the King and the Warlord and the Grim and the Grave DLCs thus far. But there is a particular character who fits the bill perfectly for a free content edition, an iconic Dark Elf who has been the subject of his own series of novels and is hands down one of the most instantly recognizable and famous characters in all of Warhammer Fantasy. I am speaking, of course, of Malus Darkblade, the Scion of Hag Graef. Bastard son of Lorhan, the warlord and maker of chains in one of Nagaroth's most influential cities, he was considered the lowest of his highborn family, with little chance to make a name for himself. But the thing that set him apart from most Drukhai was his singular willpower and ruthless ambition, so filled with hate and greed and desire that it literally fueled him consistently and allowed him to accomplish feats that few others could. His arc is a true Cinderella story, complete with orgies, flaying, incest, ceaseless violence, and frequent dismemberment and decapitation. An elf who rose from a position with no power and no prospects, but ended up becoming one of the most powerful Drukhai in all of Nagaroth. The story of that rise to power is a long one, and I'm certainly not going to cover it all here, but something that makes it really interesting and compelling in my opinion is that in a universe known for its world-spanning conflicts and epic, ancient, millennia-long grudge wars, with Malus we get a more personal, more focused narrative on a quest to rid himself of his inner demons, literally. A lot of Warhammer is on a massive global scale, and while you certainly get to see a lot of the world in his 5 novels, from the Demon's Curse to the Lord of Ruin, it's still a personal, specific quest that drives the story forward. Just like with Gotrek and Felix or any other long and well-written series of novels, the familiarity and growth of a character you followed for years often breeds popularity and love for that character, and that is certainly true for the hateful, spiteful, and imperfect, but utterly driven and completely badass Malus Darkblade. So let's do a short synopsis of his story, and then we can talk about his implementation in Total War Warhammer 2. This video will obviously contain spoilers, but I will certainly not be covering every major plot point or quest from his Omnibus, because if I did, we'd be here all week. So Malus is from a noble family from Hag Graef, which means Dark Crag in Druhir. It is a city built on slavery, and one of the 6 major focal points of the Dark Elf Empire. Malus's father is Lorhan, the Volkar, or Maker of Chains, second in command in the city, answerable only to the Drakau himself. Drakau means Hand of Night, and as there are 6 major cities in Nagaroth, there are 6 Drakaus who serve as the Witch King's lieutenants and serve on his inner council. The Drakau of Hag Graef traditionally serves as the general of the Witch King's armies in times of war, and it is this position that Malus aspires to. The right hand of the Witch King, or even to supplant Malekith himself one day. But this is essentially a far-fetched dream when Malus began his story, because he was the youngest of his noble family, and a bastard at that, son of the powerful sorceress Eldair, and half-brother to Bruglir, Yasmir, Nagaira, and Uriel. Bruglir was a handsome and popular Corsair captain, firstborn son who stood to inherit everything should Lorhan pass unexpectedly. Yasmir was his sexy sister, one of the most beautiful ladies in all of Nagaroth, and as is very common in Dark Elf culture before the retcon, Bruglir's incestuous lover. Nagaira was a powerful sorceress, and Uriel was chosen of the Temple of Cain, crippled and twisted at birth, but thrown into a boiling cauldron of blood as a baby, and managed to survive, which marked him as favored by the god of murder. Throughout the series, Malus has some very complex and interesting interactions with these characters, who all seem to either want to have sex with each other or outright murder each other. I don't know if there are any canon references to purely homosexual trysts in Drukai culture, but certainly between Malus and Negaira, Malus and Yasmir, Uriel and Yasmir, and Bruglir and Yasmir, there is a whole lot of sexual tension and incestuous desire, and this ends up playing a pretty large role in the plot as the story arc moves forward, as they try to outmaneuver each other to their own ends and sway certain family members to their side temporarily. Upon reaching adulthood, Malus embarks on his Haxir cruise, the rite of passage all highborn Dark Elves undertake. For a full year, they sail across the world, taking slaves and raiding and pillaging, and when they return, whoever led the party keeps the lion's share of the treasure. The success of this quest is often based on how much the family actually pays for it, so a particularly high-ranked noble might have a fleet of ships and the best troops and equipment money can buy. But Malus gets a single ship, because Lorhan doesn't particularly like him and frankly wants him dead. But he cannot kill Malus or explicitly order him executed, because Eldair, Malus's mother, would absolutely destroy Lorhan if she found out. So by underfunding the crews, Malus is forced to look elsewhere for support, and finds it in a group of Hag Graef nobles who help to fund the expedition. For a year he sails throughout the world, culminating with a successful raid on the coast of Bretonnia, bringing back many slaves and jewels. However, when he returns, he is ambushed, and basically everything that he collected along the way, the fortune that would have started his life as an adult noble in the City of Shadows, is taken from him. And now he's indebted to some very powerful, very angry families who want what was promised to them, or want him dead to teach future nobles a lesson. Recognizing his plight and determined to manipulate him to her own ends, Negaira comes to Malus with a proposition to find a long-lost chaos artifact that will grant him unlimited power, but of course she only wants it for herself. And so begins a never-ending spiral of deception where the siblings know they're double-crossing each other, but still have need of each other to accomplish their goals. As is common, however, Malus does much of the heavy lifting, and he travels to the Chaos Wastes with a small band of retainers, determined to claim this godly power for himself. Ultimately, he succeeds, except that the power that wraps itself around his heart and coils around his very soul is not the kind he was expecting. While inside an ancient temple structure, he takes a piece of treasure and in an instant is possessed by a Slaaneshi demon of immense power. Zarkan, Drinker of Worlds, becomes one with Malus Darkblade. And this is where his quest truly begins. The demon claimed Malus's soul and would only release him if he recovered the 5 powerful artifacts used to entrap him within that temple in the first place. The Drukai noble had 1 year to accomplish this task, or else his soul would belong to Zarkan forever. So as you can imagine, this is a pretty terrible fate, even for a Dark Elf. As a race, the Drukai are wild and free, and driven by lust and desire and hatred, so to have another being inside them other than in a sexual way isn't really on their list of priorities. Sharing your own head with another malevolent creature that whispers dark nothings and cryptic messages is not a particularly pleasant experience, but being possessed by a demon isn't without its share of boons as well. Malus could draw on the demon's power to heal and increase his physical prowess, turning him into a super elven killing machine, but at the cost of increasing the demon's control over his soul. Throughout the story, Zarkan constantly taunts him and generally only helps out when he feels like it, in particularly dire situations where death is on the doorstep. But with the unwanted help of the demon, Malus accomplishes some pretty amazing things. He roots out a Slaaneshi pleasure cult, which temporarily puts him on good terms with Uriel and the Temple of Cain, but only of course after he gets his dick wet in a big Slaaneshi orgy. Remember, these novels were written before the retcon that replaced secret chaos cults with worship of authority, the Dark Elf goddess of pleasure. So the incest and Slaaneshi cults are retconned out of Dark Elf lore, but are still a big part of Malus Darkblade's backstory. He survives numerous assassination attempts by Shades and fellow Dark Elves. He wades through chambers and mazes that distort the very nature of time and space, and summon evil monstrosities that hunt him down. He matches wits with the very nature and essence of the warp, and comes out with his sanity mostly intact, and throughout his quest for Zarkan's objects, accumulates more and more power until he eventually becomes the Dracow of the Hag itself. His story is absolutely insane. Non-stop action from start to finish, and I can definitely recommend this series. But one thing that I have to mention is that throughout these novels, Malus is often on the brink of death, starved, badly wounded, and in incredibly perilous circumstances. But his famous quote and driving personal motto is, "Through hate, all things are possible." Sheer willpower and a desire to live, no matter what, and pure hatred for his enemies are what keep him alive, along with the demon Zarkan. He is literally flayed alive by Lorhan upon his return to the Hag, to the point where his nerves are exposed and manipulated by razor-sharp instruments, and he is tortured to the very edge of his sanity. But his hatred of his father and survival instinct keep him alive for so long that even Lorhan is shocked that he's still breathing after so much punishment, and eventually he is turned over to Nagaira for healing. But I think that's a big part of his popularity. His stubbornness, and that even though he often survives completely ridiculous and overwhelming circumstances, he still gets the crap beaten out of him repeatedly, brutalized in every way imaginable, but just keeps coming back with a vengeance, even when he's barely hanging on to life. Here's a list of the creatures Malus is able to kill in combat throughout his travels in the series. I think this will give a pretty good idea of the level of badassery we're talking about here. He kills a Minotaur, Chaos Spawn, a Bray Shaman leading a particularly violent and fanatical Bray herd, a powerful Wight, numerous champions of Chaos, a recently converted Chaos Sorceress, Cold Ones, a Dragon Ogre, a Drukai Volkar, numerous Drukai generals, captains, assassins, and soldiers, many of his own powerful friends and family, and untold numbers of demons. Quite a list there, and I'm sure I'm forgetting stuff. So yeah, the word iconic gets thrown around a lot, often unnecessarily, but there are a few Warhammer characters that are as well fleshed out and popular as Malus Darkblade, the Scion of Hag Graef. But how will he be introduced in Total War Warhammer 2? What is the best way to implement him? Well, I don't really think he's going to be a starting legendary lord. I'd say he's probably the fourth most important named character in the Dark Elves Armybook, and doesn't offer enough difference from Malekith to make him a shoo-in over Morathi or Crone Hellebron as the second starting legendary lord. But along that same line of logic, that's exactly why he'd be perfect in a free content role. His model and gameplay mechanics don't have to be incredibly unique or difficult to implement, but he's so popular, he'd make a lot of people very excited when he is officially added. So yes, I do think he will be a part of the free DLC schedule for Game 2 as a playable legendary lord starting out of the city of Hag Graef, just south of Nagorond and Malekith's own starting position. From a gameplay perspective, Malus will almost certainly have bonuses to slave income or slave captured after battle, which should help drive your economy from turn 1, given that CA introduces a slave mechanic for the Dark Elves, which is what I'm expecting. I think the focus of his army, the units that he will benefit the most from recruiting and buff up more than any other, are the Cold One Knights, those famous Dark Elves who ride Noglir into battle. The charge of these heavy cavalry are considered especially terrifying when you think about a powerfully built raptor that weighs more than a ton bearing down on you, able to smash you, crunch you, dismember you with its gigantic claws, or rip you in half with its teeth, all the while with a heavily armed and armored Dark Elf Knight who has trained for centuries in the saddle. Malus is frequently depicted in the lore leading his bodyguard or entire regiments of Cold One Knights into the thick of the fighting, which takes a truly brave, ambitious, and charismatic leader. These knights cover themselves in a slime exuded by the Cold Ones so that they treat their riders as one of their own, and so they don't get eaten, and this numbs their senses and destroys their sense of smell over time, but it's considered worth it because a lot of upward mobility can be gained through glory in a regiment of heavy cav. But the biggest reason Malus is famous for leading Cold One Knights is because of his own unique Cold One mount named Spite, a hulking behemoth who is particularly intelligent and bloodthirsty, even by Noglir's standards. Cold Ones under his command in the campaign would receive big boosts to their attack and defense stats, and it's important to note that Cold One Knights will be one of the most heavily armored cavalry units in the game, as per the thick-skinned special rule that grants them a higher armor save than many other cavalry on the tabletop. I picture him as a melee-focused legendary lord, possibly with a duelist trait, so he's able to pick out and kill enemy heroes and lords in the middle of a crowd, but less effective at killing hordes of enemies. On Spite, he'll have a lot of mobility and a pretty devastating charge with a high HP pool and good armor. His Warp Sword of Cain will grant him magic damage and very high armor piercing, as armor saves cannot be taken against wounds caused by the warp sword in the tabletop game, and this should go a long way in helping further his combat ability as a duelist. Perhaps his most unique ability would be unleashing Zarkan, Drinker of Worlds. There's almost no chance it will be implemented this way, but I would love for it to be a toggled ability that drastically enhances your speed, weapon damage, melee attack, and defense, but quickly drains your HP pool and or stamina, resulting in quick bursts of insane DPS, but hurting your health and making it much more difficult to last in a long, drawn-out fight. This is pretty similar to how Zarkan manifests in the lore, helping Malus become even more baller in melee combat, but leaving him severely drained after the fighting is over. In reality, it will probably just be another melee stat buff, but I'd really like to see CA get a little bit more creative than that. Ultimately, I think Malus is one of those iconic characters that needs to be in the trilogy, and I think he makes a lot of sense as a free content character that would be relatively simple to implement. With a focus on slaving and Cold One Knights, a unique mount choice in Spite, and a unique start position in Hag Graef, I think he has all the qualities necessary to become a popular and entertaining legendary lord for the Dark Elves in Total War Warhammer 2. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know who else you would like to see, and I'll see you all in the next video. Indypride signing out for now.